what I do is I tend to just tighten them down a little bit. Then when I put the crossover tubes in and I put the lines back on, then I torque them down. Just with the tubes in them, so the tubes can also straighten the injector ever so slightly if it needs to be. Because none of these surfaces, while machined, are not exactly perfect. You don't want to torque and tighten down the injector and have it cockeyed or you know, not straight, and then find out later when you got a crap load of diesel that it's the one injector that you tighten down too tight, you know. Alright, basically that's that. Okay, I got all the injectors in. Now, things to look for: burrs on the end of your crossover tubes. Over here, I already lubricated the O-ring. So now what we'll do is we will install it. Make sure you slide it in. Now, it's just very easy. Just give it a little till it clicks. Once it clicks, then you know it's in. Then the other thing is this bolt here, so make sure you torque it down. I tend to torque down the injector hold down nuts after I put the fuel lines on. But you know, the Cummins book says torque these first, then those. But the guys at the Cummins shop, we never did it that way. So now I'm going to install all the crossover tubes, and then we'll do the lines, then we'll work backwards. Alright, it's going to complicate things, but here you can see a burr on the inside of my crossover tube here. Now, I don't know when this happened. It could have been taking it out, could have been 6 months ago. But since I saw it, I figured I would show you guys. Here you can see the O-ring here is kind of fucked up. These are things to look for, you know. Now I'm going to attempt to hone this out and hope that it works fine. And alright, I got the back one installed, the back set of lines here. Don't know what I was thinking with that. Alright, I torqued the back set of lines down. I always torque these first, hand tighten all of them, then put your bolts in back there. The reason being is that the lines will flex their way into where they want to be. Otherwise, you got to force them in, and you can cause burrs on the ends of the tips. I forgot to mention that the only bolt that you torque down is number 2 and number 6. 6 is optional, so is 5. The reason being is that the intake horn blocks the way and you can't get a crow's foot in there. So it's important to make sure you torque it down to about 28 foot-pounds, which is a little bit more than snug with a wrench. Now, the other thing I should also mention is that all of these manifold bolts that you removed should be torqued down to about 18 to 20, which is not that tight. So if you're trying to shoot from the hip with a wrench, be careful, don't over torque and snap the bolts. Big thing to deal with. Now all I got to do is take my grid heater, make sure you clean this, you know, wipe some motor oil on it so it'll get a good seal, and then simply put it like that. That goes back on. Then the APPS sensor, or throttle position sensor, comes back on top. Then the intake horn goes on the top. Make sure this is on top and it's actually grounded, because there's a gasket here on both sides. Make sure that there's some oil on them, that they're nice and clean, there's no dust, no powder, so you get a good seal. Now these bolts too, you also torque down to 18 to 20 as well. And that's it for now. Okay, many of you guys may have trouble getting these 4 bolts back in. So a little trick I do is I use my right hand and I kind of wiggle the housing a little bit. I use my left hand and I just take a little wrench like this and just turn them. Usually I try and get this corner, then this corner. Once I do that, then you just continue to wiggle it and it'll go right in without any trouble. Sometimes if the bolts have never been turned, they're still got Loctite on them. That's definitely something that can happen. Obviously everything had Loctite on it from the factory. You know, you can put new Loctite on there. Is it necessary? Who knows? One of the things I put on here is motor oil around the plastic, the rubber boot. So this will slide in nice and easy. There's no tearing. It's important to use oil on this half of the motor. Anything past the intercooler. If it's on this side, like, you know, here or down here, use water. Spit lube works the best, because you don't want the oil to get in the radiator, the intercooler, because it'll just make a mess. It's something important to note, just for future reference. Once I get these bolts on, I'll put this back on, then tighten this down. And then all that's left is the valve cover. By then my brother should be home. We can slop the valve cover on and then bleed the system. Alright guys, for those of you who've never bled a truck before, it's best to work with numbers 1, 3, and 4, and if you can, 5. Now, the nice thing about the aftermarket lift pumps that I've noticed is that if I back off on the washers most of the way, I can actually get the truck to prime on its own just by bumping the starter. Another thing you can do that I've done is you pull the relay in here for the stock lift pump and use an alligator clip and hot wire it to the battery, and the pump will run as long as you do that. Same effect. So by doing that, you know, it'll bleed right through the injection pump, right through the lines, and once you get 3 lines bleeding fuel, you can tighten them down, and then all you gotta do is start the truck.